Hello, I am Jake Collins, and this is the first in a series of 16 episode audio commentaries I'm going to be doing on Knightmare, my favourite TV programme ever. 16 commentaries, 8 series, that's 2 commentaries per series. And we start off with a commentary for the very first episode of Knightmare, Series 1, Episode 1. Which was first aired on Monday the 7th of September 1987. And who can forget, I know I never have, the story of me at 4 years old having watched DuckTales on CITV, which I can't have enjoyed all that much. It wasn't one of my favourites, but it had kept me quiet for 25 minutes, and I was enjoying the adverts afterwards, and then proposing to turn the TV off. But in search of another 25 minutes of peace, my mother suggested, well, why don't we try this new thing, Knightmare? And we did try this new thing, Knightmare, and I was hooked on it for life. And I don't think my mother didn't come to regret that decision at various times in her life, as Knightmare had taken over my life so completely, or in so many very significant ways anyway. What can be said about Hugo Myatt as Tregard the Dungeon Master? Many things have been said, but really it's impossible to express the importance of the role he plays in the show, and the necessity to get someone in the role of Tregard who was going to be able to present to us and to the teams, and to act the character of Tregard, and to adapt that character and host role into whatever was happening in the gameplay. And in doing this, Hugo Myatt really has earned himself a very deserved reputation as an icon of British children's television. The opening to the first quest here contains a lot of spiel from Tregard, a lot of explanation. And later on in this series, later on in this episode, we'll get much shorter introductions to the quest and the gameplay. I do think this initial one does go on a little bit too long. We really need to see them get into the dungeon, get started, and then we'll start to understand anything we don't yet understand about the show, about the gameplay. And there was plenty I didn't understand when I was watching this at 4 years old, but everything did fall into place over the next few episodes or the next few years. And I don't think quite such a long bit of talking to the first dungeoneer David here really is going to help anyone. When I first rewatched this episode on video in March 1996, I was 12 years old. I thought at that point, oh, I wish he'd just get started, get into the dungeon and see what it's actually like in there. But we had this long explanation first. It was too long for me at 12, it was probably too long for me at 4, and yet I did sit through it in both cases, and keep on watching to this point the first dungeon room on Knightmare, the 4-door starting chamber, which also, in this case, takes far too long. I used to call this the open room, because yes, the first puzzle here is the letters on the floor to spell open. And doesn't it take David, not so much his fault as he can't see, James, Lucian and David, a long time to get to grips with it. Too long, really. And really that's the trouble with the teams in this series. Now, I've always maintained, and it's true, they're in a difficult position. The show is brand new. They haven't seen it, watched it, enjoyed it every week, become fans of it, and applied to go on it because they really want to, which is certainly the status quo in later years. So they are in a rather unenviable position of being guinea pigs, trying out the show, trying out the format, particularly this first team. There are 2 unaired pilots, which this team, I'm not sure if they were shown, but the production crew, Tim Child, Hugo Myatt and everybody, had some idea of what they were doing already, but not enough that this first episode, and indeed the first series, isn't very awkward. And that, as I say, you can't blame on the teams. However, having said that, and always bearing that in mind, at last, at 6 3/4 minutes, we get the first bit of action in the dungeon. David actually managed to step on the O. However, yes, though we must always remember to give the teams in this series the benefit of whatever doubt there is, I do think all of them are really unreasonably bad at engaging with the scenarios that are being presented to them, at just getting on and playing the game without really unnecessarily looking for hidden tricks and traps and thinking, well, it can't be that easy, can it? And doing something completely stupid. It's a difficult balancing act judging these Series 1 teams. I used to be a lot more lenient on them than I am now, but really, the frustratingly slow progress in this series, not seeing level 2 until episode 3, not seeing level 3 until episode 8, a lot of blundering about level 1, getting rather repetitive. Really, that is largely due to the teams not playing this as well as they should, I think, despite the fact that they are guinea pigs with this new format. You know, I always think watching this first wall monster scene with Olgarth, it's a shame that something they didn't sort out in those unaired pilots was the mask. The wall monster mask, which is causing Guy Stand even here, for the only time actually on camera, terrible breathing difficulties. He keeps sucking the mask into his face, is how someone expressed it. And it's a very good description of it. Obviously he can't breathe properly in the thing at the moment, and that is very awkward for him as an actor trying to do this first bit of Olgarth wall monster questions, and for us watching the show. By episode 2, with Granitas's first appearance, we're sorted. There's some sort of air circulation hole punched in the mask somewhere, and he can breathe properly. But this is just one of the particularly awkward things about the awkward first episode in an awkward first series. And yet, am I sounding negative? Really, I'm only trying to be critical. What the first series of Knightmare does do is establish that Knightmare is brilliant. The interactive medieval fantasy adventure is enthralling, and with those cliffhangers, we'll always come back to see whether the dungeoneer will survive on the next level, or whether the dungeon will win once more, and we'll keep on doing that. Every September to December new TV season, eagerly for the next 8 years, and we'd have done it quite a bit longer than that too if we'd been given the chance, but it's not time to talk about that sort of thing just yet. What Knightmare never was to me is a living computer game. Yes, okay, that's kind of the start point. The initial idea, what if we brought a dungeon medieval style computer game to life and actually used this blue screen technology to have real life teenagers play it on the telly. But the end result is far greater than a living computer game. Nobody enjoys, well, I doubt that anyone much enjoys watching other people playing computer games. Certainly I've never enjoyed that, and I have been subjected to it at times in my life. The difference with an interactive game show like this one is that though you are watching the team playing the game, you're in it with them. You're in their thought processes. You're in the gameplay. You can work it out for yourself as you go along, see if they agree with you, see if you're agreeing with their decisions, because they're talking about it as a team. They're playing the game through. They're not sitting there tapping away at keyboards and joysticks and you can't tell what's going on in their minds. That is the crucial difference. And I think, perhaps, Tim Child never fully realised this, and perhaps always thought of Knightmare too much as a computer game, which should be advanced with the latest computer game technologies, like virtual reality creeping in later on, which I do think is a shame. Like so many creators, he's come up with a winner, but he doesn't really realise what it is or why it really works. At least for me, and perhaps for some other viewers too. Those time bombs are very computer gamey, aren't they? I wasn't always sure I liked those hanging bombs in Knightmare. I was expecting them when I rewatched series 1 to 3, or at least not surprised to see them because they do feature in at least one of the choose your own adventure sections in the Knightmare books, which I'd had for a while. But I suppose really I'm fairly indifferent to them nowadays. I'm not indifferent to this character, Lilith, played by Mary Miller. The more I've watched and thought about, and at times written and talked about Lilith over the years, since I first rewatched her in March 1996, I've liked her more and more as a character and as a part of the Knightmare gameplay. I've always enjoyed her little catchphrase, rock to rock and stone to stone, span the pit and cross the zone, not span the cliff. Thank you very much, first Knightmare book. And at times it's been written down wrongly as cliff elsewhere. The causeway is spanning the pit between the cliffs, isn't it? the way she lets you through and rewards you, at least after this appearance, she has no reward for David here. Apparently that hasn't been thought of yet, if you've brought the right object for her, and chucks you down into her pit, bringing an end to the quest, if you haven't got the right object for her, is very much early years Knightmare. You couldn't call Lilith definitely a goodie or a baddie, and later we will get characters shepherded into one camp or the other most of the time. Like Traegard himself, really, she's very ambivalent, changeable, quite prepared to see the quest continue or not continue, and not feel too strongly about it either way. It's obvious, knowing that this sort of future for good characters and bad characters is coming up, that Traegard is eventually going to join the ranks of good characters, and rightly so. Under those circumstances, he has to, as the host custodian, dungeon master. But I do like to see him in these first series, rather sinister, rather macabre, rather enjoying the good and bad of the quests. Exactly as we, the watchers, do. Of course, David and friends just made their rather stupid fatal decision there. They turned left in the corridor of the catacomb. They should have turned right. At least that's what Olgarth told them for their two truths will aid you information. And of course it matches up with the adventurer's code, go right if there's no other clue. But you can't really blame David and friends for thinking that there was another clue there. They went left because there's a symbol by the door on the left that's the same as the charm in your hand. There it is, the first Knightmare death. Creatures in the darkness draining David's life force, and that's the end of him. But don't worry, he survived in our reality. Apparently they weren't supposed to take that talisman. Traegard says it would have been enough to have remembered the symbol, kind of implying, well, you were all right to go through the left-hand door, but you only died because you didn't have the magic lamp. Whereas, according to Olgarth's information, they went through the wrong door, but I guess they still would have needed the magic lamp anyway. It's an unfortunate wrong object, that talisman that matches the left-hand door, because as we find out in a couple of episodes' time with Simon's level 1, those talismans are supposed to be keys to the doors in the corridor of the catacombs. You correctly take one of them, you go to the door with the symbol that matches the talisman, and unlock it with the talisman key. The key to the door is not always key-shaped. So, a bit of a mess there. A bit unclear exactly what was supposed to happen, but the net result is they're dead. Of course, the very fact that Olgarth gave out that clue as their two truths will aid you information is rather anomalous. As they realise, from here on, Maeve's quest, that war monster information needs to be information about which clue objects to take. It's no good if you have to get a perfect score to get any information about the clue objects, which is something they forget at the start of Series 2, when attempting to give out passwords. They get the war monsters to give out passwords for your two truths information, and so that leads to some terrible problems with object choosing. So, it's teething problems, it's feeling the way into the show for everyone involved. But these early teams really don't help, and they could play the game better. And in many ways, it's a shame they don't. The other thing I was going to say about Lilith was, over the years I've really come to prefer her to Mary Miller's other character, Mildred. No doubt it's an absolutely brilliant transformation performance into Mildred, and very entertaining in some ways, but I've always kind of felt in more recent years I've formed the thought properly that Mildred's kind of very obvious, which I suppose is probably good for younger viewers. Not that the show as a whole is really thinking about younger viewers yet, or at least as much as it arguably will in the future. But comparing Lilith and Mildred, which is a valid thing to do, I think, as they're Mary Miller's two characters and they perform the same role on level 1. One of the objects is for them, and if you take it, you get off the level with their help. I do really prefer and like Lilith in her position of power, with her cavern with the serpent's mouth, which I think is a nice location, her little chant and her causeway. I like her a lot. Whereas Mildred, I really could take or leave. We had Open in this room in the last quest. Here we are with Maeve, Christina, David and Lee. We've got Sesame, Open Sesame. And even though all 6 quests in this series do have walking on something on the floor in this chamber within the first 2 rooms, see a bit later, we are looking at some variety. Actually, walking on letters to spell out a word is confined to this very first episode. David's done it very slowly. Maeve's doing it here. She's walking much more quickly, but it's a longer word, and there's some confusion about stepping on the E or the A there, so it still takes quite some time. I've always thought it's a shame not to be able to have the letters for Sesame disappear as she steps on them, like the letters for Open do. Of course, the trouble is there's 2 E's and 2 S's. They have to preload the sequence into the computer before the room starts and press the buttons to make things happen as the team work through, and they don't know which S and which E Maeve will step on first, so the letters have to stay there. Sticks out a bit really, doesn't it? Particularly compared to Open in the very same episode. But there we are, no problem. It's still a good room, a good opening episode, an exciting opening episode. Certainly I knew come hell or high water, I'd always be watching Knightmare from this point forward. And indeed, I did. Treguard's outro there, very nice. It's only a game, isn't it? Stuck with many viewers for many years. That Series 1 cast needed sorting out. It needed Mogdred removed, Giant and Gibbet added. Perhaps Gumboil's name instead of Knight. But there we are. A bit of a mess, but what a wonderful mess it is. And what a lot of exciting viewing it's going to lead on to. And hopefully you'll join me again for the second commentary in this series of 16, which is going to be on the final episode of Series 1, Episode 8.